Hello, welcome back to Framework. I am Al, and my partner John is with me.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
I'm trying to hit the ground running here because this is a very large, mouthful to bite off for one podcast. We're discussing specifically Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. And
other parts might come up, but that's the thing. That's
yes.
what we're talking about. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which is a series of three-hour films in their theatrical versions, which have since been released as extended editions, which are all pushing 4 hours, if not over 4 hours. They are some of the most hugely influential blockbusters of the last 25 years.
Ever. Yeah.
Ever, really. Ways we might want to get into, but let me start by posing this question to you.
Mm-hmm.
Is this trilogy the greatest, most impressive technical achievement in film history?
It's without a doubt in the conversation. I mean, you would have to consider this, and if I'm considering it, it's really hard for me to be unbiased or kind of neutral in regards to these films, but it certainly seems like it. It's certainly, I don't know what you're going to say is like, well, as a technical achievement, I guess there's individual films like something like The Matrix, the original Matrix, kind of creates brand new stuff you've never seen before, invents new techniques of filming stuff like that, and
out of whole cloth.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things like that that are going to pop up through the course of cinema.
But this really innovated like motion capture, at least, which is something we take for granted to an extent now. That, of course, that's the way of doing this type of creature.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a new thing that I had never seen really before this movie.
You'd seen Jar Jar Binks. This just kind of did it in a
way
that no one realized was good. It didn't seem like it was really. It looked like it was going to be, maybe I don't know, speaking of Peter Jackson, maybe like a high frame rate kind of thing back in the day. Like, I don't know if this is actually going to work. This might not change how cinema is. It could have been just a thing or the Zemeckis cartoon movies, the whatever those things are.
It's sort of like rotoscoping, the way that they actually did the like Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, but it's a digital version of that. And in both cases, it's kind of unsettling. The Bakshi version and the Polar Express version. The effect is not pleasing, really. And this could have been that. I mean, you're right that Jar Jar did motion capture in a way. Like, this did it successfully.
No one's calling Jar Jar a success.
Yeah, and that's not the digital effects that are letting him down. That's the conception of the character and the direction that poor Ahmed Best is given.
That's part of it, though. That is part of motion capture as a thing. Like, that's an off-putting performance as a motion capture character.
Yeah.
And you can't have that, even if the tech is impeccable.
Yeah. But this, it was risky. I mean, let's talk about Gollum that's one thing I want to track here is, so one of the things about the Lord of the Rings trilogy was considered for decades to be just unfilmable in live action. Like, it was impossible to pull off. And it really, that was not a crazy point of view. It still would be to this day. Very difficult to pull off. And there is 8 or 9 at least different things that are hard to pull off in a live action context that these movies pull off very seamlessly. And I really feel like it's sort of a house of cards where if one of them doesn't work, everything kind of starts to fall down around it. If the spell is broken of this complete world that we're seeing up on screen, which is so much the appeal of this. And Gollum may be the one that is the most difficult, because it's innovating in that motion capture realm. It's doing something that we've never seen work successfully before, and it's doing it in a dramatic context that Jar Jar Binks is not really playing in. It's also a difficult dramatic character anyway.
It is a massive linchpin of the emotional story of the film.
Everything falls apart if you don't buy Gollum. And he's a weird, tough character. Even just a person in makeup, on stage,
that would be appalling. Yeah. I mean, it's it is kind of also a character that is going to look gross no matter what. Like,
Yes,
kind of one of the point of the characters is he's disgusting to behold,
right.
and yeah, he's also like a villain basically. I mean, there's a lot of gray area to what his whole deal is, but that also is part of the difficulty of Gollum is that
But
you
he's
have to
also somebody with multiple personality disorder, which is a type of thing that I really do not like in film. I think it's a thing that's so like naturally dramatic, I guess. As like, it is a real, I guess, mental disorder that feels more like a dramatic device than an actual mental illness. And so I think it gets overused and overplayed in like bad Hollywood stuff. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so much bad Hollywood versions of
yeah,
multiple personalities that I have no idea what it really looks like, to be fair. And I assume not too much like Gollum, but as a Hollywood version of it, especially for a strange fictional creature in a
yeah,
fantasy realm, it's amazing how much you track. That okay, this is different drives are 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 influencing this side of the character, and as opposed to this side of the character,
and it's
and
fractured
both
his personality in this way.
yes, and both characters track. Like
Yes,
you see what Smeagol's deal is and Gollum's deal.
and there
Uh,
are fully dramatic scenes of those two personalities arguing with each other.
and there's some of the best scenes in the movie that
Yeah,
everyone remembers. It's nuts. It's nuts that that
yeah,
works. Uh,
yeah. And if it doesn't, I think like everything falls apart.
are you
Um,
familiar with the Erdogan lawsuit about Gollum?
what
No, you're not.
Erdogan,
Okay.
the like dictator of
The-
Turkey?
yes. Uh
What?
huh. Oh, you haven't heard? This is
No.
fantastic. This is one of the most amazing like true life fucking movie stories. There was a okay, so Erdogan, the fascist dictator of Turkey, president. There's a rule in Turkey that you can't make fun of Erdogan, as there are in
Mhm.
many fascist dictatorships. And a journalist, prominent journalist in Turkey, just posted a meme on Facebook comparing Erdogan to Gollum with a
Just
bunch
like
of straight
physically, or like
yes,
a bullet point list of personality traits. Oh, okay.
no, straight up images of Erdogan that look like images of Gollum right next to him. Uh, and this guy was arrested for this because Erdogan did not like it, or at least his crew did not.
Mhm.
His team caught this, and he's a prominent journalist, so he's brought to jail, and it became a major civil rights lawsuit in Turkey, uh, which ultimately involved Peter Jackson. Like Peter Jackson had to actually submit testimony for this. I don't think he came in and stood witness, but
Yeah, but he had to
yeah.
submit an affidavit of some sort saying that.
Yeah, and the argument was that all the pictures that were used in the meme were of Smeagol rather than Gollum,
Mm,
which therefore meant that it was not actually saying Erdogan was a bad guy because Smeagol was the good half
was the
of the
nice one.
personality. Yeah, which is what Peter Jackson says. No, no, actually, Smeagol is quite lovely and kind-hearted, which
Mm.
isn't actually
Would
true.
not. I don't know if I would say he'd make a great autocratic leader, just, despite being less openly malicious than Gollum.
hmm But because
Yeah.
all the shots were of Smeagol, technically, this actually worked, and they got the guy off,
Oh, really?
and he's not in jail because of the Gollum defense here.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. um, I don't even know what to say to that. That's incredible.
fantastic.
um,
And the funny part is, if you look at the meme, Erdogan does actually look quite a bit like him.
yeah, I'm willing to believe that. I haven't Googled Erdogan lately. I wasn't even sure that he was around when these movies first came out, but
I don't think
he's
it was
probably
when
been in
they.
power for like 35 years or something. I don't
I think it was like 10 years after, actually,
know.
which points to the long-standing reputation of these movies. They're just
Yep.
in the cultural conversation forever now.
Yeah, not even the Hobbit movies being misfires has really dampened that. I don't think.
Yeah,
In a way that
yeah.
I mean that happens too. Like the Star Wars prequels, people not liking them did not seem to, if anything, elevate the originals even a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and everyone made a ton of money. I mean,
Yeah.
aside from just sort of muddying the waters, none of these things are actually bad for the franchise or for the people who made them.
So to get back to my point about like how many different things they have to get right here,
Yeah.
like just every single race in this movie. Um, the hobbits are a thing. They're like, well, they're like little British people, but
Mhm.
really little. They're like 3.5 feet tall. But they're not little people in the sense that uh, what we used to call midgets, that are
Right.
you know humans with dwarfism or something. They are their own race of people, and they're just at a different scale, and so you have to incorporate them in a way with full-grown humans and elves, which are like taller humans. And you also have the dwarves, who are another like miniature race of people that is on a different scale from regular humans, but also distinct from the scale of the hobbits that have to be in the same frame with all of them at once. And they're also need to be like credible in action scenes, despite being like under 5 feet tall. Um, which
Yeah.
not really, needle to thread there, but it looks so natural and like perfect in this.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching this the first time, in what was it, 2001? Yeah, the when it came out in theaters, and the word was it was pretty good. But uh, just going in, seeing the opening, which is a all timer, great opening, really pulls you into the world, really cool. But then they flip right over to Hobbiton, and you see Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen interacting. Uh, as and he's twice the size of Elijah Wood in this, but they are having this like domestic conversation. They have this chemistry between each other as actors, as performers. They really seem to be inhabiting the same space, even though they're of different sizes. And the immediate thought is like, oh my god, they're nailing this. They're absolutely succeeding in this completely crazy thing I've never seen before. It's wild that, and they're doing it immediately and in full view right away.
Yeah, they're not hiding from the challenge or like obscuring it. Like, I mean, they're using every trick in the book to adjust these things. They have like different versions of the same prop that are at different sizes for like a tea kettle that is giant when Elijah Wood holds it, and then they have a miniature exact copy of it for uh, Ian McKellen to hold. And they're doing forced perspective thing where they're using the focus of the camera to make it look like they're sitting next to each other, and in fact, uh, Frodo is sitting like 3 feet behind Gandalf. Uh,
That stuff blows me away. Like, they were able to manage the scale for that correctly all over. It never looks off, the
yeah,
scale movies. I mean, I'm sure they cheat, but like just and also that they've figured out how to get the actors' performances dealing with this at the same time. The eye lines are right.
yeah,
It
they really worked hard on that, and it pays off like incredibly. And this, we're not even getting to any like computer effects yet, which I mean, we did talk about Gollum being a computer effect slightly, but also, man, like Andy Serkis, what we'll put that aside because we'll do a whole thing about the casting in a bit. But
Mhm.
like the elves are their own challenge, making them feel like sort of ethereal and otherworldly and superhuman, but also not like too cool for school that they totally like ruin our ability to take like Aragorn's primacy as a action,
Mhm.
and not that they're just like too fey or silly. I mean, plenty of stuff is totally silly, but it's done with such sincerity and earnestness and craft into everything.
Is I think a major component of how this works so well. I mean, it's an earnest text. There's really no room for winking and in adapting this, but you would think it is because it's so like literary and British and old and slow that you would think, well, they're going to have to kind of make uh, some compromises to appeal to a wide audience in 2001, and they don't. They're just like, no, we're all in on that. We're
Yeah,
using the old archaic dialogue and we're going to make it sing. It's
yeah. I mean, but they make it into an action movie, and it works totally because it turns out that there is like a really like ripping action adventure yarn in the Lord of the Rings books. It's just it's sort of buried by by virtue of being written by an author who's totally not interested in that part of it.
Yeah, it's I mean, he kinda likes the idea of it, like, it comes along as, as folklore, as as epic quests of the sort of Arthurian legends, or that's the sort of
Yeah.
appeal for him, where all the actual fighting is kind of off camera, and it's just and it is a saga in that sense, like like some sort of Icelandic myth story or something like that. He'll talk about the monsters a bit.
Yeah, there's some Beowulf in it,
Yeah.
where Grendel gets some play, but the actual fight is not really like described blow by blow or anything. Um, the action scenes are not crafted on the page to be super exciting exactly, or like,
No,
um,
it's it's just there because it's part of the literary style that he's aping in some
yeah.
sense. Like this is it's all-time legendary folklore kind of archetypes that he's pulling out and kind of creating his own thing. They were quite good books. Have you ever read them? The Tolkien originals?
Uh, I mean, you just mean Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Oh yeah, of course, yes.
Hmm.
I have not. I read a piece of the Silmarillion. I didn't get too deep in that, but The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings as a kid, I was way into. Um,
Hmm.
which is another thing to uh, get to, I guess, that you gotta think about the time this came out in, man. You gotta remember what's going on at the time, and like the environment this came out in was helped it like really land with me. That this was before, as like a geek, you expected adaptations of stuff you liked to be good
Yeah.
from Hollywood.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
this really got that ball rolling, where it's like, oh no, we can actually do a good version of Spider-Man, a good version of Lord of the Rings, a good version of the X-Men or Batman, up to Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, like stuff now. Like, there's an expectation that those things are good. This up before the year 2000, you expected the movie version to like not satisfy the fans at all.
Yeah. There's very few occasions before then when you could adapt something like this and it would come off.
Yeah.
Like, I can't actually think of many at all. Certainly not of this kind of story.
No, I mean, like the Tim Burton Batman movies are pretty successful, and I suppose the uh, Richard Donner Supermans.
They're just taking iconography, though. They're not adapting stories with plot beats. They're kind of doing their own thing, and they're
Yeah.
very distinctly influenced by those filmmakers too. They're that's very much Tim Burton's Batman.
Absolutely, and that's why I think fans like viewed it that way. That you're like, well, that's an interesting Batman story, but it's not like they're never going to do the Batman story that Dark Knight Returns or whatever.
Hmm.
It's gonna get sort of mangled by the Hollywood machine into something that has some similarities to the source material that you're really into, but it's never gonna be translated like this directly. Um, and for all that,
Hmm.
there is actually this is I think a magnificent piece of adaptation of again books that are not very cinematic on the page, but have just raw material of great cinematic sequences, like littered every which way you look. Um, and they
Yeah,
really did a great job of adapting, just of being very true to all the material, but just adapting the pace and the tone to a Hollywood blockbuster format.
and also pulling the characters, in their full literary glory onto the screen in a way that I don't know if
Mm.
it's tough for me to say if these characters would resonate for me if I hadn't read the books as much as they had, but I suspect they would. I
I
think
think they
these
do.
characters are really well drawn and really well executed performances. Everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing and what purpose they serve in the story, and they all have this satisfying arc. Like, every single character in this has a
Yeah.
satisfying arc. Of I don't know, 2 dozen major characters in this stories, and they're all perfect. They're all. I don't think there's a single bum note in the entire cast.
Well, okay. We, what, maybe we can talk quickly about bum notes or like what,
Okay,
you know,
I was looking for them and I struggled. There's like maybe some in Return of the King, and that's all I could find.
yeah, they're pretty well confined to Return of the King, in my opinion. Um, so, I mean, first of all, let's do a quick ranking. Which ones?
Okay, this changed a little this time when I watched them. Actually,
Hmm,
before this, I would have said Two Towers was my favorite. Now I think
that
I've
would be
firmly
mine.
I think I'm saying Fellowship now. It just has so many cool parts. But I think it goes Fellowship, Two Towers, Return of the King. Although even with its flaws, Return of the King is has some really good stuff too. It might be
Yeah,
number two. It's all one movie is the point, you know.
yeah, it really. I mean, well, it's all of a piece,
Mhm.
and it does really flow together remarkably well. Um, but I would say that the Two Towers would be my top one because I think it flows together as a complete piece, the best, and the best stretch of the
Yeah.
trilogy is the second half of Fellowship, where you have the actual Fellowship.
And oh yes, okay. Well, that is wonderful. The everything where they're basically kind of just stretching their legs and showing adventures there for the second
Hmm.
half, where you get like they go up the mountaintop and then they go into the mines of Moria, and then they have sort of a brief break in the elven magic woods of Lorien, and then then there's the big riverside battle at
Yeah,
the end of the film. That's a great run, and it's just everything you
absolutely.
want from an adventure story, and it's thrilling and fun, and yeah, they're firing on all cylinders there, clearly.
Yeah, the entire Moria sequence is just like the unbeatable stretch of fantasy cinema. It is. It's a dungeon crawl in the classic sense. It's using the most iconic characters in the genre. It's just done to the frickin' nines
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah,
Uh,
it's one of the best parts of the book too, and I
mhm.
remember another one of those moments watching this film for the first time. Is like, holy shit, they're nailing Moria! Oh my god, like it's thrilling to see it on screen as well as it is, and they get so much strength from just even like a quick line or a
Mhm.
so much narrative just comes from the production design of these films. Like it tells you so much story just by what you're looking at. Like
Oh yeah,
there's that part where they walk into that the big big
the big
empty
hall.
courtyard with a yeah, and there's just it's just pillars that go on forever. And I think Gandalf has a line is like, "Here it is, the great hall of the Dwaradelf," and you're like, what, what is
Yeah,
that?" And
there's this whole
it's
world down there.
yeah, and that's all it is really. You don't really get more details of it, but at the
Yeah,
same
and
time,
it's
it's
just
enough.
columns stretching endlessly. It doesn't really. You don't get a sense that this was a city. There's like people.
Yeah,
What was going on between these pillars? Who knows? Like there's no signs of markets or residences or anything, but it's whatever. It's ancient. It, I don't think
hmm
that even fits in the timeline they set up. Where like, uh, if you dig deep into Tolkien, like they, somebody was there like 30 years ago between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and
yes,
but it feels like it's been abandoned for 2,000 years. Except also, it's like, oh, my cousin's actually dead. I thought he was still alive here. So that's a weird, but who cares? It's a
I
nitpick.
mean, you feel like all the answers are there if you want to find them.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
yeah, within the context of this story, you don't need to know everything. You just need to know like that there are answers.
Mhm.
You know that they are there. They have been considered and thought about, and here's the proof of it. But in the context of that hall, they're just going to run through it. Well, they run from goblins,
Yeah.
and that's all it does in this story. But there is more story if you want it. It's in the Silmarillion, probably.
Yes. Um, so yeah, definitely the second half Fellowship is the strongest stretch of the trilogy. Overall, though, like I mean, Fellowship is two movies, um,
Yeah.
like very distinctly, and so I guess I give the edge to Two Towers for being one thing that I think is paced pretty well for being a 3 hour, uh, bloated epic. Um,
hmm
and then Return of the King is bloated in a way that the others are not, in a way that's not always great, and it's got some of like several of the least good parts of the trilogy. Um, you know the
Such as they are, sure. Yes.
the cold open uh,
It's
segments,
definitely the worst
like
cold open. Yeah.
yeah, that format they've set after being like two of the best scenes of the trilogy. That whole prologue where Kate Blanchett speaks to us in Elvish and then like gives us 3,000 years of fake history in like 5 minutes. That's also a pretty like incredible action sequence for a minute or two, and uh, that is what I mean. One of the best stretches of filmmaking. Like, again, I sound so hyperbolic about all this, but
Well, it's hard not to be hyperbolic. Yeah.
the amount of like narrative heavy lifting that has to be done there and world building, and it's exciting, and like it's both giving you a like immediate Hollywood action like opening, jolt of energy, but also like giving it a classy feel of like there is
Prestige.
history here. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's prestige. There's a whole mythology here that we're going to treat super seriously and catch you up on so quickly. Like that's quite a feat of adaptation. That's like
Yeah.
they really
Even the stuff
nailed
that
it.
it ultimately isn't like it doesn't really matter that there were many other rings, which is one of the first
No,
things
it
they
doesn't matter in the slightest.
yeah. But somehow that improves the whole thing, knowing that well, there are these other good rings, and they're good rings for
Mm.
real. Ooh, they're powerful. Like the men, they couldn't even handle the rings.
Yeah,
But
the
then,
elves could, and who knows what's going on with
yeah,
the dwarves? Like,
in
but
general,
they
what's
had
going on with the dwarves in these movies?
no. We don't need to. That's fine.
but but yeah, that there's this one ring.
Yeah,
Oh, oh, don't even get me started on the one ring. It's great. It's
no. And
and also,
Sauron, like
uh,
his design is like so close to being awful, where he's like wearing a trench coat almost, uh, and yet when he's just swinging his giant like mace around like a 5 wood and sending people flying,
yeah,
it's just incredible and exciting.
it's amazing how much this design has kind of trickled into everything else now. Like
Yes,
a lot of the stuff that you see in these movies ends up showing up versions of it in almost any fantasy based thing ever
yeah, but
since.
even like I mean like the Snyder cut images we've seen seem to be like basing Steppenwolf off of the Sauron design.
Yeah,
Uh,
like Sauron could be in any Dark Souls game without breaking a
Absolutely.
sweat. Like it's just sort of the look of evil armor now.
But that brief like 30 seconds to a minute or whatever he's on screen, like uh, something about that design, the scale of it, how they capture that, it establishes him as a villain who never speaks a word. And then
Mhm.
from after the first 3 minutes of the first movie, for the next uh, 11 and a half hours of these movies in the extended versions, is just a big fiery eye.
Yeah,
But we still feel the threat of him after that point. We know who he is. We I mean, we don't know who he is like on a personal level, but we know what he is and what
well,
like the threat of him getting the
yeah,
ring back means is that
he's
he's going to start.
existential evil. Yeah,
Mhm.
just pure evil, and that's kind of what's interesting about this. Is it's the most fantasy of fantasy tropes. It's the battle between good and evil. Um, and it's done in a way that doesn't feel so explicitly just like basic. It feels like it's kind of about it's well, I mean, this movie probably benefited in the sense coming out as it did right after 9/11, in that it feels like it's just you against everything awful in the world. is
Yeah,
is how it
I
somehow is communicated.
that has become sort of conventional wisdom around, at least around the internet, that the post 9/11 landscape was like perfect for these movies to really hit. I think that gets a little overstated. Uh,
I agree with you actually. I think that these movies would have hit no matter what.
yeah, me too. I think
Hmm.
they're so classical and amorphous in their good versus evil thing that there's no time when that won't resonate. Um,
Well, I think that what that is they're tapping into a feeling of that sort of sense that there is profound and just massive evil in the world. And
yes,
watching this now in 2021, you have a different relationship with that feeling.
it
And
certainly feels different now. Yeah,
yeah, and that just there are forces of entropy and rot and destruction that can seem overwhelming at all times,
Mhm.
and that feels like that is a universal thing. Like, I mean, these books came out in World War II era, right after, I believe, and so everyone thought they were metaphors for World War II,
Yeah,
I
but they
think
were more influenced by World War One.
yeah,
Is
because it's the same thing. It's always just that there is a destructive force in the world, and you will ultimately be tasked to stand against it. And
yeah,
even if you're not actually having to go to war, even if you're
and
sitting at home watching on the internet as something goes down in Washington D.C., it still taps into that emotion, which is pretty universal and probably defined by storytelling and books of this type. But still,
I do think there's something good about Tolkien, though, or interesting about Tolkien. I guess it's good and bad for him as an author, but so much of the tone we talked about of him not being that interested in the daring do of this adventure quest is that he, as a person, as an author, always seems to be more interested in the last war than the one that is going on currently.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, people like, I think when the books came out, grabbed onto it as like, oh, this is like, this metaphor is for World War II, but he wasn't looking forward to World War II. He was looking backward at World War One entirely, his
Yeah,
own experience there. Um, and I want to return to that when we talk about the endings, but
for sure.
we're still in the openings, the literal cold open sequences. Because I don't know, like the Two
Yeah, this still
Towers.
came from the first. The Return of the King doesn't have a great cold open.
Yeah, the Two Towers has a great cold open though.
One
It's
of the
just a
best.
pure action sequence, but also it's such a great. It's part of what gives that movie its great pacing is that it allows it to have a slower first 30 or 40 minutes, uh, where we're introducing like a new country and like all the politics of Rohan and all that stuff, and our heroes are more scattered, um, and but it serves us up like some great kick-ass spectacle action right off the beginning, and reminds us of Gandalf's relationship to Frodo, and that he's still out. I mean, reminds us that he's not just dead, basically.
Or it tells us. I mean, I think
Yeah,
if you're coming in, without familiarity with the books, like, I, I mean, I don't know. I think they showed him in the trailer, but like,
they did.
I, but yeah, like that's also a moment that is not exactly in the book. He kind of talks about, well, yeah, I fought the Balrog. We were falling through the earth or
Yeah,
whatever, but you've kind of written that off because it's just presented in the first movie as falling into abyss and disappearing, and to go back to it, and you're just like, oh shit, this is
yeah,
great. Oh, yeah,
it's awesome.
yeah.
I would love to talk about the Balrog too for a second.
Of course.
Because I remember the one thing they were good about, I think, in the trailers for Fellowship is that they did not really show the Balrog. I think they played up like they. I think the trailers ended with like the "You shall not pass," big thing, but that's just Ian McKellen's face,
Hmm.
and you saw like a big flaming leg step into frame at one point, but you didn't get a full blown shot of it. And
Yeah,
going back to what I was saying earlier about how like in the
and
year two, sorry, go ahead.
if you knew what that was from the book, you're like, oh fuck yeah, that part's
Yeah.
gonna be the best. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're still a little concerned. At least I was. Like going back to what I was saying, in the year 2000, you still expect the Hollywood version to kind of fuck these things up. And I remember when the Balrog stepped out, and I got my first like full blown look at him in like wide shot, like they are not holding anything back, and it was such this weird feeling of both relief and like oh my god, that's a big scary obstacle here, and like they pulled it off, but then like relief that they pulled it off. Wow, like if they can do
Yeah.
that, like they've already been pulling everything off so far, but man, they've really got this. Like that was, I think, where my last care floated away about whether the adaptation was going to work.
They kept surprising you with that throughout, or surprising me at least throughout the series with the characters though. Like, because I'm a fan of the book going back. I'd read it a number of times before the movie, so I had like familiarity with it and things that I was like, how are they going to handle Grima Wormtongue?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that was going through my head, and they keep nailing those things. The Ents was a big one. Like the that could not work very easily. Like the
Very easily, and I'd say of all of them, that's the one I don't think that they pull off the ends quite as like amazingly as they do the elves and the dwarves and the hobbits. Like
I mean,
the,
I don't think
all the
Tolkien does
non. No, yeah, it's probably true. Any of the Ents that aren't Treebeard, I think, are way less impressive and and not so great.
Kind of,
But
yeah. That that one who lights on fire and then puts himself out. That's a
yeah,
good end. That's
that is a good end. Good end. Way to go. Um, I, but by that point, like they've already gotten everything so right that
yeah,
it's not enough even to be like nitpicking. Like it doesn't change anything, and they get the important one right. It's like
right.
they probably could get the rest of the dwarves like that are standing in the background looking pretty dumb, but they got Gimli right, so that's all you really need from that. Uh, they could have, they did. I mean, it was great. But so this is all kicked off by saying the opening of Return of the King one does not have like an action element to it, uh, so it doesn't give you that like initial jolt, and then it's also just fairly inessential. I mean, I guess it's essential in that you need it's giving us background on Gollum.
I like
But
it. I like the idea of it. I just think as a scene, it's kind of like it has some of the worst effects.
it does have really weird bad
Yeah,
effects.
yeah.
The underwater effect when he's being towed by a big fish, and then like
It's
it's one of the least convincing like fake water tank effects I've ever seen.
Yeah, and that's it stands out in this film in movies like this where like there's only a few bad CGI moments here
Mhm.
that kind of take you out of it. Like for the most part, even when you can tell it's like 20-year-old CGI, it doesn't matter. It works. It's that Jurassic Park thing where it's kind of not the not how many pixels you have, it's how you use them. And
Yeah.
but yeah, that's an off moment.
It's also one of the only off moments too, I think, of getting like the makeup and stuff wrong, because Smeagol in his like original Hobbit form like already looks like the greasiest, sketchiest Hobbit
Yeah,
around, and I
I
don't think
think
that's supposed to be his vibe.
I mean, Andy Serkis was killing it. They kind of I
Yeah.
feel like they felt obligated to let him play Smeagol as a person. It should have just been a pretty just a pretty little boy like Elijah Wood or
Yeah.
something. That would have made it a lot
Well,
clearer
no,
than
I think it
this
could have been Andy
greasy
Serkis.
thug.
They just
Ah,
didn't need to make him like already look like a Hobbit that was on like hooked on heroin before.
how
And he was like,
possible is it to make Andy Serkis not look like a heroin addicted hobbit though? Like is he can he play a hobbit? He wouldn't. If you were just casting him to play a guy in these movies, he'd be a dwarf or something.
no, but I don't think they need to make him look as like pallid and like greasy haired. Like he's using Wormtongue's hairstylist in that
And
one before he gets corrupted.
he's also
Um,
using the voice, which is weird.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like he's already like weirdly far down this road. There like, was a, and I think he's just being directed wrong and like sort of made up a little wrong
Yeah.
there. And what's weird is that then they have the sort of progression of him turning from the Smeagol Hobbit creature into Gollum, and
hmm
there's some great like brief shots there of like him sort of halfway through the transformation, and there's this whole scale there where like some of these effects are really good. Um, One
Sure.
of them, he
Yeah.
looks like Jim Carrey's The Grinch, but
Yeah.
this is before that The Grinch came out, and
hmm
also Gollum is an intentionally unsettling character.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is one of the Gollum challenges. One of the things that's tough about him is that he's not pleasant to look at or spend time with.
Yes.
And
Um,
somehow they make that work. I think by giving him some humor, that helps a lot. He's not funny in the book really. He's
yeah.
um and yeah, and just a great performance at the center of it. That certainly helps.
Yeah, an incredible physical performance, an incredible like multiple vocal performances that are
Yeah.
pretty great.
And
Um,
despite all the extraneous stuff on top, the fact that he's wearing like a weird onesie, rather
yeah,
than being just sort of built into the world like all the people he's sharing the screen with, and that he's doing a voice, that he's got this incredible intense physical characterization, that he never loses sight of the soul of the multiple characters he is playing at once.
yeah,
It's I mean, when people said he should have got an Oscar nomination for it, I think that is spot on. This guy is
absolutely.
inventing a new style of performance here and just killing it. So yeah, he's great, and I think as a result, he's been rewarded with a really good career. And
Yeah, he like cornered the market on motion
yeah,
capture in a way that like nobody else really does. It's not like, I don't know, when Tim Burton's Batman came out, like Michael Keaton played every superhero for the next 20 years. But
yeah.
like,
I mean, other people have done them, but like they keep
yeah,
coming back to circus. Like, and he can carry movies now. Like he is
yeah,
the protagonist of movies. If you have a mocap protagonist, you're like, well, we need circus. He plays King Kong. He plays I don't know
the,
what the apes
the other
names. He's
apes in Planet of
yeah,
the Apes, like the hero of Planet of the
yeah.
Apes.
hmm
Yeah, he's the gold standard for that, like so
Yeah.
clearly in a way that I don't know that there is another like parallel to that in another
You got
field.
to go back to like Lon Chaney, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or Christopher Lee, maybe as like the
yeah,
ultimate
kind of, yeah.
vampire. Um,
Man, Christopher Lee. I mean,
but I'm not really. You know,
we'll
20 minutes
wait.
ago, he said we are going
We'll
to
wait.
talk about the weaknesses of Return of the King, and
Okay.
so the other perspective too. I think the other big weakness of Return of the King to me is the Army of the Dead. Like those
Mm,
effects are let down. They look like Scooby Doo ghosts. Um,
they're a little too green, maybe.
yeah,
I like them. I think they're cool.
and ethereal.
I
But
mean,
they're kind of a lame Deus Ex Machina in the book, and they're kind of saddled with that. Like,
They feel more dangerous, I think, in the book. Like you're worried a little that they're going to turn on him, or that they could just die. That seems more of an option in the book. I think there's an explicit thing where it seems like Gimli is going to get killed by ghosts for a while. Uh, that's not really present in the films. But
I mean, they try and
it's
do it in the extended version, and it's just I don't know. It's clearly a side quest.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's something for Aragorn to do. It's sort of
Mhm.
a sort of a mythic hero's journey that it feels influenced by stuff like Beowulf in that way.
Yeah, and the lore there of like why they're cursed and how Aragorn like lifting that curse is part of him becoming king.
Yeah, I like all
I
that.
like some of that stuff. I just the way it shows up. I mean, one, I just don't like the heroes having an invincible army is always kind of like lame to me. Like,
Fair
uh,
enough. I mean, it does kind of it just like it ends as soon as
yeah,
the Invincible Army shows up. It's just like, well,
and
that's
it's the
that.
second big like cavalry charge out of nowhere
Hmm.
that affects that battle,
Yeah.
and the
Did,
other one
did
was
Rowan
better.
need to? Could Rowan just have stayed home? Yeah.
I
I
mean, they
mean,
bought him a couple extra hours, I guess. I don't, or I
yeah.
mean that's
If
even, but
there's a lot of buying time in this.
also, so we watched last weekend. I did a weekend long marathon of these with my stepson, and he had questions about the Ghost Army, and one of them they asked me, I was like, so, but if Aragorn had just shown up with one ghost, would that have been enough to like, because the orcs can't hurt him, like kill him? Like, yeah, it would have taken longer, I guess, but
A
yes,
lot
you
longer.
didn't really
Yeah.
need an army. You're right. It would just be one. This Pac-Man like ate the pellet and it never wears off, so he's just going to go through eating 4 million ghosts. But they're ghosts in
It's
this. Their ghosts are being eaten in Pac-Man. It's a bad analogy.
I understood it. The visual of it, which is just like ghosts, like it's
Yeah,
almost like a scourging fire taking over the guys, or maybe a bubble bath or something. It's
yeah. It
just
still looks like a bubble bath commercial or like a dishwashing soap in a
yeah.
commercial, like animated.
I think that image is it kind of works in the sense that evil in these films is defined as sort of this
Yeah.
this growing rot more than characters, like even the orcs, are some of them have a bit of individuality to them, but for the most part they're just sort of representations of chaos that are perfect, specifically born out of the earth
Mhm.
to kill things. They are evil personified in a very specific way.
Yeah.
So in that sense, getting scrubbed away at the end, as a visual makes sense and works for me, even though it's a bit mixed if it's an army of traitorous dead men doing it. It's still kind of
I'd,
cool,
I'd say
kind of.
it makes sense and doesn't work for me. Just because visually, I don't find it fair. It's like one of the only like parts in this entire trilogy that where the visual is not super striking.
Hmm.
And it feels uninspired in a way that everything else is so inspired. Um, so that's my gripes with Return of the King. The other thing I have is that there are, I guess this is not just a Return of the King thing. There's a couple of performances
Mm.
throughout this trilogy that are not bad, but are pitched at a very different level than the rest of everything, which is very
Some of these I
grounded.
like. If I'm reading what you're suggesting.
Yes, I think I know which one you like the best.
Okay.
But yes, the people who are going at a much more operatic level, and I
Yeah.
think that's Denethor, his performance.
Hmm.
John Noble, I think, is a great actor who's capable of being more like believable and down to earth, but he is being directed to go full bore over the top. Um, Brad Dourif is also being directed in that fashion, and I think he pulls it off much better.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's like a soloist coming out and just being like, check this shit out. Yeah. Those. I think that one thing that is kind of notable about those two performances specifically is that there are very few evil characters in this,
mhm.
despite the presence of a lot of evil in the series. It's mostly these orcs, these sort of things that feel like almost a natural force. So when you have evil
Yeah.
characters. The movie does tend to play them a bit broadly. I mean, I think that Christopher Lee is probably the most successful one. I mean, it's pretty hard to argue that, I would say. But both those evil performances, Denethor and Wormtongue, are yes, operatic, and I
Yeah.
think they're not that way in the book. But there's a lot more of those characters in the book. They
What I think that Denethor has more like there is something to that character. There could be a more tragic figure,
he is,
but the
yeah.
performance is not pitched that way at all. It's to make sure we know, like, okay, like this is the father of some people that we were invited to care about, but he's an antagonist, um, and we need to know that right away, and we do. And also, there's no mistaking that with Wormtongue, obviously.
Yeah,
Uh,
not at all.
but Wormtongue's not as complicated of a character. He's a weasel. You know,
Yeah. I mean, there's more to him in the book too, but like it doesn't matter. His purpose narratively is evil stuff. And I think that is why Denethor is pitched the way he is, because there's so much going on in Return of the King. There's so many other things to deal with. His narrative purpose is to be an antagonist,
yes,
to be
absolutely.
an obstacle and a barrier, and somebody that also represents the weakness of men and the way they are sort of susceptible to the power of the ring and susceptible to pride and ego and vanity, and watching it in 2021 again, that feels like a lesson that doesn't that I can
Yeah,
relate to. I can be like, okay, yeah, sometimes mad kings happen and they really suck. So it feels a little less broad than it might have 5 years ago to me now. But
I mean, I think it's just as broad. Great, I think you're right. Probably, I guess that 2021 has now like the world has broadened.
Well, no,
it, to
I
a
would have
degree.
preferred Denethor as president for the last 4 years, if
Oh,
I'm being
absolutely.
honest. Yeah,
I think Denethor was a horrible steward for much of his life, and he's a more interesting character if he's not. Is I guess what I'm getting at. That uh, there's a way. I mean, this is Monday morning quarterbacking to the nth degree, but I think he gets enough screen time in Return of the King. I understand that there's a ton of stuff that movie is trying to do, and so you could forgive it for taking shortcuts there, but it still like spends so much time with him that
hmm
I think there is room in hindsight for a more nuanced performance where like maybe he is like a little more genuinely like noble and smart, I guess, or just nice. Um, and it's only like when something involving Aragorn or whatever comes up that threatens his power position that suddenly like then he shifts really hard into this other mode. But he
hmm
just scowling and crazy from the start. And
Yeah, I mean, if he kind of surprised you in a negative way, I mean,
yeah,
that I could see that being kind of a cool thing to do with that character. Is like, oh fuck, that guy let us down, But the minute you meet him, oh, you can't trust
yeah,
Denethor. That is true.
he's
Um,
already gone crazy at that point, which makes sense in the context of he's already grieving and he lost his favorite son, and that's what drove him crazy. But
and
yeah, I don't know.
he's about to lose his stewardship, and the enemy is batting down the door, and there's a lot of shit on his plate. To be fair,
Yeah, no, I
um,
can do all that. I think and I think John Noble could have done a much more nuanced version of all the shit on his banging down his door being the thing that wears him away. But it seems like he was just born crazy and has always been crazy.
yeah, I mean,
To an
when you
extent.
see flashbacks of him before, after they win
Yeah.
a victory, he's like, "Oh, Faramir, you
Yeah.
let us down
Oh,
again."
this piece of shit.
Yeah, it's a Palpatine performance,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of that in these movies, but
And that's he's
I
being directed to be that way because I know
he,
he can do
oh for
stuff
sure.
that's not that like that's not his fault.
I
The
think he
actors.
is good at it though. I
Yeah, he is.
enjoy that performance. I do. I think he's a lot of fun, and that's like, why should your songs not be suitable for my halls? Drinking,
Yeah.
eating the tomatoes and all that, and it also allows for the big operatic death scene.
Yeah,
Which,
that which is great. Like I
yeah,
love that.
I do too, and it is it kind of ignores practicality. It kind of is ridiculous. He runs the length of like 2 football fields on fire just so he can run off the side of the cliff.
Oh, sorry. You meant his. I thought you meant Faramir's, where he's like while he's singing the song and eating the tomatoes. Like
Oh, that's great too. Yeah, but in a
I
different
love
way.
that. Yes. Okay. His Denethor's Destiny is absurd. Um, more so in the like extended version where they like put an insert shot that shows you like him like marching like away from the city to this like whole area that's just tombs, like the necropolis behind Minas Tirith.
Hmm.
And I don't think that was in the theatrical version, so you kind of could have assumed that he was just in his hall and ran out. But they put that insert shot in the extended version, and it just serves to make you think like, man, he really ran like a tight 3K while on fire just to throw himself off that cliff like a total drama queen.
Yeah, yeah, it's very purposeful. Like, I'm definitely going to run off this cliff. It's because otherwise he wouldn't make it.
Yeah. I mean,
In
hell,
the
maybe he
book,
landed on one orc and burned them up, and then finally he contributed something.
he has a really cool death in the book too. That is very much the kind of ending that that is a more layered character would receive, which is he just burns on the pyre,
Mm-hmm.
but he's holding one of the palantir, the
Yeah,
the seeing stone things,
crystal
and then
balls.
yeah, and then that palantir is forever ruined. And if you ever look in it, you can't see any other places. You only see a pair of old hands on fire. Ooh, that's pretty cool.
That's kind of
But yeah,
I think about that. That like it, John Noble gives a much better like performance where he's like falls onto the fire and sees his son that just got pulled out of it, and he's starting to burn up, and like that's when he gives his most like it's just a facial performance, and then he gets up and runs 3 miles and throws himself off a cliff. But
mhm.
you have like the other performances I'm thinking of there in that moment that could have just ended on the pyre there, but the way the movie plays it is the other performance where he's going to run off the cliff while
Mhm.
on fire,
Yeah,
which is all fine. Like, okay, so that's the end of my Return of the King gripes. I now want to praise Return of the King,
yeah. There's a lot to
and
praise.
yeah. So to go back to this idea of like, oh, what it was like in 2000, like at the same time, I am somebody who has always been an easy mark for like epic fantasy sagas. I like that.
Me
I
too.
like something that's long and like I feel like like digging into it in the middle portions, but there's like something big on the horizon. That feeling. And in 2000, as a geek, there was the high watermark for that point because there was the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Star Wars prequel trilogy, and the Matrix trilogy all going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
Um,
Harry
and
Potter was gearing up too, so that for a
I don't think
younger,
it started
well, not
couple
not for
years
you so
later.
much, but yeah,
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Sorry, that was
mhm.
I had not. I was just not aware of it at the time because I was a little too old for Harry Potter when it came
Yeah,
out.
some people were into it. Let me tell you, they were. It was a big deal then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
No, yeah, but also like those three, uh, Star Wars, Matrix, and Lord of the Rings were all like building up. I believe the third and final entry of the trilogy all came out in the same year.
Oh,
And
so it's sort of an end game Game of Thrones,
exactly.
Star Wars situation.
And
Yeah.
Harry Potter was just getting started. So,
Right.
and it wasn't going to be
Hmm.
a trilogy. It was going to be I don't know what you call it, septology, maybe. Is that?
Whatever it's going to be. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Um, but people already knew that from the beginning. Like the books were structured as it's a
Right.
7-year school. There's one book per year, and so on and so forth. And for as much as I think Return of the King is the weakest of the three films, especially in the light of when it came out then, like it was the third chapter that actually wrapped things up in a satisfying way that felt of a piece with what had come before,
Oh yeah.
and you came out of it like not happy exactly because there's some melancholy tinge to it, but supremely satisfied with how it had come out, which nobody came out of the prequels loving how it had
No.
all played out.
Well, the end of the prequels. By the end of by Revenge of the Sith, you're kind of just like, let's see what they do with this. Like you're done with it, and in an emotional context. It's
Yeah, I think I was like, well, that was the best of them because they finally like did everything that
Mhm.
was interesting about the prequels was kind of jammed into that like one that should have been the entire trilogy, but it was all there, like the materials there. It wasn't that great, but uh, you know,
Mhm.
at least I got the stuff I've been waiting for the last two
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah.
Um,
They had a fight on a lava planet. I knew they would have a fight on a lava planet. Yeah.
yeah,
It's it's a whole different thing.
yeah.
And I imagine Lucas wanted you to feel the way you felt during Return of the King at that point.
Yes, I think that
Um,
was should have been the idea.
mhm.
And then the Matrix Revolutions was an enormous letdown because I was still like, the Matrix Reloaded ended on a pretty big kind of like cliffhanger, kind of mind fuck. Like, oh wow,
This other guy survived too.
yeah, and I'm not sure what. Well, just the whole idea that
I know what you
yeah,
mean.
the architect's revelation that really the chosen one narrative is just a part of how we keep our thumb on you. And that was interesting. And then I don't know, third one's really it's just not very good. And,
No, I'm not a fan. Yeah.
and that's more in line with, I mean, again, being a nerd who is, I guess, raised in a different era. I had been trained to believe that one, Hollywood was going to not get the stuff that you loved on the page right on the screen, like it was going to be distorted and mangled in some way, and then also that the endings of the big fantasy sagas that I love were always kind of let down.
Mm-hmm.
And this one was not. It's, again, I think it's the weakest overall movie, but it's not a letdown because it doesn't have enough climax in it, or because
No.
things don't pay off.
Oh,
Everything pays off.
Everything
Yeah,
pays off. Everyone has a full arc. Yeah. And as an audience member, you have a full kind of like, yes, it did the thing I wanted it to do. Thank you. And that's nice. That is a really good when you actually stick the ending. It's so important, and they do for the most part. Like it's. I would say, the thing is, when I watch these movies now, I watch all of them. I've never been like, yeah, you know what I'm feeling like. I want to watch The Two Towers. It's something that I have to plan in advance and be like, okay, I'm going to watch all these movies, and it's going to take a week or however long it's going to take.
maybe that
And
is the drawback to
well, yeah, I mean, it's a problem with the story they're telling. Not a problem, but it is something that is inherent. Like
it's so cohesive that it's hard to find like a bite-size morsel of it. You can just be like, if I'm also being a Marvel nerd, like I can just watch
mm,
Thor Ragnarok by itself, or an hour of it, or a piece
yeah,
of Ant-Man, and not feel like. Whereas I'm like, I'm flipping past Two Towers on TBS or something. And it's like, well, that's an hour. Like, it's already an hour into it. If I was gonna do this, I should probably just start Fellowship from the beginning. Um, but then
yeah.
that's, I had to set up a whole 3 day. It was a holiday 3 day weekend with my stepson to fit in all three of those movies, and it took us 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, I spent the last week watching them, and it was, and even during a pandemic where I can't really go anywhere other than my job, it was still kind of like it took some finagling. It was, it took a lot of like, okay, well, I actually can't do that day because, well, you got to do yoga, so I have to. If I can watch part of it that day, a lot of that kind of calculation has to take place when you're going to sit
Like,
down and watch this. Yeah.
you pull out your day planner, and 90% of the entries from the last 12 months are in that one weekend. Trying to figure out, well, how do I fit Return of the King into this?
Yeah, and I think that as a result, because of that, I do feel Return of the King. You start to feel the length. You start to feel, which I guess it's not unlike what the characters are feeling, so it's okay.
Oh yeah, like the characters are definitely feeling exhaustion. Like, I mean,
Yep.
Elijah Wood is just this like shambling mess throughout that entire movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um,
He's
and it works
worn
though.
down to the nub. Yeah,
Yeah,
and there's a bit of that, in the watching of it, where you're just like, okay. Oh, okay. So Pelennor Fields is done, but we still got like an hour and 45 minutes.
yeah.
Okay. Hey, this is John again, and I'm just dropping here in at the end to let you know that, we ended up recording quite a bit on Lord of the Rings. This went on a lot longer than we anticipated, so we decided it's probably not something we could release as one recording. It will, in fact, be 3 recordings, so there are going to be 2 more episodes on Lord of the Rings in the coming weeks. This is just the beginning. Next one is going to be on, the incredible DVD releases of these films and Tolkien's humanism as it is represented by the hobbits. The wizard fight, we're going to talk about that some, and a lot about the production design and sound design of these films. Some of the greatest ever committed to any movie ever. So look forward to that, and that'll be in the next episode. Thanks for listening.